Hey y'all, I'm Sunny Shell, and tonight Bree and I are going to be talking about creationism versus evolution with Aron Ra and Donald Prothero. So sit back, buckle up, and let's get to the sunny spot. Hey everyone, hey Bree.
Hello, I'm so excited about this show. Did you know that Donald worked on some of the documentaries that flavored my childhood and my passion for paleo art? So I'm so excited about this. He's
Yay!
also written books on cryptozoology, which is a subject which I just love, and I'm just stoked to be able to talk to him. And he debated some of the people that you got. I only hear legends about, so I cannot wait to dig into this.
Oh, that's fantastic. We are so honored to have you here, Don. And we also want to welcome our wonderful friend, Aron Ra. Thank you for coming back on, Aron.
My pleasure. How you do, Don?
Hello, good to see you.
So
And
we
I
really
also want
do
to comment
appreciate
that
you being on.
Bree has been helping me with the project I've been working on for the Arachnomorph series. About to finish that one up, and that's been fun to do. So thanks for your help there, Bree.
It's been fun. This has been a great project from start to finish. Thanks for including me. And I'm to understand that this is not your first time meeting Don, is it?
No. We've caroused a couple of times.
Yeah.
Yeah, we go to some of the same meetings, and I gave a talk in Dallas in 2015 where a lot of Texans were there. So,
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Well, Aron, do you have any great things that you want to say about Don? Maybe something that we may not know about him that you know?
Oh no, I don't know any background trash. Nothing
Okay.
like that.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. We really do appreciate it. To start off, we have kind of an opening question for you. We want to talk about the areas of paleontology that you specialize in and a little bit about your favorite species evolutions.
okay, you want me to go first here?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I was one of those kids who got hooked on dinosaurs at age 4 and basically never grew up, except this was back in the 1950s and 1960s, and I was the only kid I ever knew in my entire education through high school that liked dinosaurs. That was how rare it was back then. Now, virtually every kid goes through a dinosaur phase about until puberty kicks in, and they change their interests. Um, but I, of course, when I got to undergraduate, I had an advisor at UC Riverside, where I did all my undergraduate degrees, who was a mammal paleontologist. And as I became familiar with what there is to do in paleontology and where the opportunities are, it was clear that dinosaurs were not the way to go back then, because nothing was happening in dinosaurs. But now, because too much is happening in dinosaurs, they have too many people, there's too much crowding, there's too much everyone fighting over the same material. Whereas I work on fossil mammals now and have since I started graduate school. And I have groups I work on, I have pretty much to myself. I work out of the American Museum of Natural History in New York most of the time. In fact, I'm headed there in about a month. And I try to get there at least once a year, sometimes more. And they have 7 floors of storage of fossil mammals in New York. An entire floor of rhinos, an entire floor of North American camels, an entire floor of North American mastodons and mammoths, an entire floor of North American horses, plus 3 other floors of almost everything else. And most of that collection was built over the night from the 1920s till the 1960s, and then went into storage, and basically wasn't available till the year I arrived in New York as a graduate student in 1976. And now there's tons and tons of unstudied material in that collection. And I'm one of the few people on the whole planet who takes time to study it. Just a couple of years ago, I published a whole monograph, a big volume on North American javelinas or peccaries, which are rare except in Arizona and Texas, but they're common in Central South America, and they were common in North America for 40 million years. And dozens of new species were in that collection that no one had ever formally described. And they're just sitting there 30, 40 years and more, just sitting in the cabinets, now nice to put away and labeled, but nobody had ever taken the time to figure out what was what. And so I ended up doing that and publishing a whole book on it. And I started my first career was working on North American fossil rhinos. Rhinos lived in this continent for about 45 million years. And they had a whole floor of them. And the guy who was the scientific staff who put them away sort of trained me on what he'd figured out. And I did the rest. And I had the rhinos to myself for 25 years until I finally published a book-length thing about them. And then that's now sort of the standard reference anyone wants to work on. So that's the kind of stuff I enjoy doing most, because it's really cool stuff. There's lots of beautiful specimens that no one has ever worked on. And I have no competition. It's really nice. It's no crowding, no backstabbing. So.
Now, you mentioned a peccary species. Now, that brings to mind one of the younger creationists' favorite argument, the old peccary tooth that we call Nebraska man. Is that something you've actually, have you ever actually been able to see that in any of these collections?
Yeah, I've touched the actual specimen. It's sitting in the cabinet there like everything else. It's just a little tiny little tooth about the size of your pinky fingernail. Okay, it's really small. And under normal circumstances, it would never have been paid attention to. I mean, if I found a tooth like that today in those collections we have now, I would say, okay, throw it in an unsorted teeth collection. We're not going to waste any time on it. But at the time it was found in 1911, it was, looked sort of human-like. And unfortunately, the guy who was the chief paleontologist there at the American Museum in New York, Henry Fairfield Osborn, was convinced it was a hominoid, a human relative. And that would be very strange for something out of Nebraska, which we now know these beds are about 8 million years old. And they, at the time, not found hardly any peccaries yet. So they didn't really know what to look at. But the actual tooth has no crown pattern left on it at all. It's completely worn down. And it's also oddly shaped because it's rotated in its socket. So it's a very strange tooth. The wear patterns, sort of look primate-like, but there's no cusps left on it or anything like that. And so, unfortunately, Osborn was notorious for being incompetent. He was rich and powerful, but not with very much talent. And that, unfortunately, is also common in my field. A very common the case that rich and powerful men will do whatever they want, and they can't be stopped. They'll publish garbage, and nobody has the power to stop them, especially a century ago. Osborn just a good example of it. Anyway, so he makes a big fuss about this when he decides it's a primate from we now know the late Miocene. He's called the Pliocene at the time. And that was the start of it. Well, within a couple of years, they started finding peccary teeth in the same beds and realized that's what it was. And so about 5 years after he first made a big fuss about Hesperopithecus harold-cooki was the official scientific name for it. Other people like William King Gregory was a much more competent anatomist, recognized, nope, it's just a peccary. And so quietly retracted. Now, the creationists, of course, will jump on this because it sounds like scientists are all incompetent. No, just one in particular. And scientists make mistakes, but the point is science corrects its mistakes. It was corrected by Osborn's own colleagues. Osborn himself never felt comfortable retracting it, but his colleagues eventually published retractions. And they did it because they learned more. They got more specimens so they could tell what peccary teeth looked like in that area. And they got it fixed, and it's all, it's passed. And then on top of that of course, creationists don't know any biology, so they think it's a pig, which is what they call it. And that, of course, gets a great laugh line out of their audiences. It's not a pig. Pigs live in the old world. They're from Eurasia and Africa only. They've never been native to the Americas. Only peccaries are native to the Americas, and they're unrelated, okay? Peccaries are not pigs. They haven't had a common ancestor in 45 million years. So they're a very separate family. They did the same job that pigs do in this continent, but only superficially. They don't look at all like pigs if you look at them close enough. And you can tell them apart real easy. And then the other point of this, of course, is that the reason it was so easy to make this mistake was that human teeth and primate teeth in general look much like pig teeth because we're omnivores. We have usually all of our molars are sort of rectangular or square with 4 little cusps on them because they're designed to chop up everything, meat and vegetables and seeds and all the rest. And so we have an omnivorous diet. So we have what are called bunodont teeth, is a technical term. And that is common. So when I talk about this, I put up a slide of a gorilla jaw and a peccary jaw and say, okay, which one's a primate and which one's a peccary? And unless you know how to look, you can't tell them apart. So it's a very easy mistake to make.
I want to talk about this too. I mean, just in defense of Henry Fairfield Osborn.
Go ahead.
I mean, he was not fooled by the one and only hoax that was ever deliberately done
Right.
in evolution, but it was done against the British Museum.
Yeah.
We don't know the suspects are, we don't know, have confirmation, absolute confirmation, but we know of a trio of gentlemen that appeared to work together toward this, and the goal seems to have been, apart from money, to embarrass the British Museum. So they created this
well.
but they did this falsify. But the thing was, is it wasn't evolutionists trying to create the hoax like we see creationists creating these hoaxes all the time, right? With these falsified fossils, the man track that's stepping on the trilobite, and there's a whole bunch of Carl Baugh was responsible for a number of them himself.
Alexi tracks, fakes, very common.
Exactly. So creationists will make these frauds all the time, but of course scientists don't. So the one that they can ever point to is the Piltdown Man, and that was a hoax that was done against science. And in fact, one of the motives for this was that one of the primary suspects was Arthur Conan Doyle, who was the author of Sherlock Holmes, and he literally believed in fairies.
Yeah.
And he was very angry. He was very angry with the naturalists at the British Museum because they didn't believe in magic, and he was part of a supernatural society, so he was really upset about that. So that was part of the thing, was he wanted to embarrass them. As I said, he's one of the three primary suspects who all seem to be working together. But the thing is,
we know for sure he was part of it because he was the one who brought the suspect down.
And then there was the Hinson, who was also working in the British Museum, who was found to have this case that had all of the chemicals in it for doing the forgery, and he also was an associate of Dalton, who was the next door neighbor, Dawson, who was the next door neighbor of Arthur Conan Doyle. So So anyway, and Doyle was also involved in the digs and that sort of thing. But anyway, to get back to Henry Fairfield Osborn, the creationists argue that I'm getting ahead of myself. He did not believe the Piltdown Man. When he was running the British Museum or the American Museum of Natural History, and he received the Piltdown fossils, he classed them as a mixture of human and ape bones. That's the way he displayed them in the museum. Okay, kudos to him. Yeah, and then so it's surprising. He wasn't a complete fool, but I get what you're saying when it comes to his own discovery. And I don't know what was it glory that was going through his head? Who knows?
I'm not saying Osborn was completely incompetent. He was less competent than others. Let's put it that way. So he was
well put. So the thing is,
actually, a lot of his subordinates were better at certain things than he was, and of course, he resented that because he's rich and powerful and had the department under his thumb. So it's complicated.
So a lot of the resentment I think that they get is that people made paleo art about that, right? About the
but don't get ahead of me yet, because I gotta finish this.
I'm getting you to paleo art. We're gonna fight, Aaron. So
we will. But so Henry Fairfield Osborn comes up with this thing, and the creationists say that because some artist in the London Times or whatever it was, which is like the 19th century's version of the Weekly World News, right? The Inquirer, something like that. So it's a tabloid rag. They do this depiction. Okay, and the creationists say, this is the claim, that the Nebraska Man fooled the entire worldwide scientific community, except that no one, not one scientist ever, Henry Fairfield Osborn himself alone, proposed this thing, and everybody said no. Everybody that ever examined it.
Let's put it that way, because there's too little to go on.
Yeah, they said we need more evidence, and so they put him to task for 5 years until he finally fessed up. And as Donald just said, he didn't go willingly into that. No, he trusted one of his friends to post the retraction for him, and I get that. Shame, I get that.
Yeah. Okay, what were you going to say about paleo art? We can finish on that thread if you want.
Oh yeah, I was just that the way that we do reconstructions, there's gonna be a gradient of artists there, and it depends on where it's commissioned and things like that. When it's commissioned by a pop science magazine, you don't put it. You're not supposed to. Yeah,
it's a gray area, right? Most of what paleo artists do does not have any direct direct connection to the bones, especially if they're really incomplete, like a single tooth. But it's not to say that if I have a single tooth of certain things, I can't tell you a lot of what that animal looks like because everything else goes with it. So it's not completely a case where it's just all made up out of thin air, right? Paleontologists have a lot of grounds for a partial jaw. If it looks like something we already have a skeleton of, we can then reconstruct it. So it's not completely there, but there's a lot about paleo art is indeed not technically science. It's art, right? And so they have to make judgments about color and skin or hair or feathers and posture. And there's been fads and trends in paleo art over the last century and a half where they go from animals that look like they're skeletons almost with shrink wrap skin on them, which is a style you saw a few artists, to animals that are puff wrapped, so they look like giant balloon animals. There's no way to know for sure which is right, except for a handful of Ice Age specimens, which are known from actual mummies. We have woolly mammoths and we have woolly rhinos that are known from true mummies, so that we know exactly what their body looks like. The rest is partly art and partly science, sometimes more art, sometimes more science. And, that's it. A paleontologist doesn't require reconstructions to understand what they're looking at. We look directly at the bones and teeth. And I don't usually put reconstructions in a lot of my stuff. I put the actual skeletons in. That is, to me, sufficient to see what the animal looks like. Although a lot of people can't visualize a whole animal from a skeleton.
I noticed that people were asking whether Donald Prothero could create a fake fossil these days and actually convince somebody. There's a lot you could get away with in 1912.
Right.
That that you couldn't get away with in 1960.
Well, no, there's a lot of things that are called pseudofossils. They're objects that look vaguely like they might be biological or fossils. And mostly in this case, it's amateurs who find something they think looks like a fossil to them, but an experienced paleontologist can tell right away it's not. And I get this all the time. People sending me pictures of this and pictures of that. What you usually are, they would call concretions. They're this pieces of sand or whatever that have cemented together in a shape. And that looks convincing to people who only look at that thing as a soft tissue preservation, but it's just a very convincing concretion. First thing a paleontologist looks for is close up to see if it has the detailed internal structure. If it's bone, it's going to have spongy stuff inside. So you look at a broken surface to see if it really does have bony texture inside. That's where I look for. If someone's claiming something's a bone, it's not the shape that tells me that. It's the internal texture. And this is something you learn as a paleontologist. And we've all been fools, right? You pick up something in the field, you think it might be, you're not sure. And then someone else shows you evidence that, in fact, it isn't a fossil. And there's also famous stories about people being, pranked by fakes that are just in good spirits, not intended to be confuse the paleontological community. My most famous example was the guy who collected most of those specimens that are in those 7 floors in New York. The guy named Morris Skinner, who worked for the Charles Frick lab most of his life from the 1920s until Frick died in 1965, and then Skinner kept on working afterwards. Skinner worked out of this ranch in Ainsworth, Nebraska. I've been there many times, where he would go out in the field during the summer and, of course, winter in his ranch. He had a giant barn in his yard where he kept all the fossils before they were shipped back to New York for Frick. And in there, in addition to that, he had this one thing. He loved to stump every paleontologist who came to visit him. And the thing looked like it's like a ring with a hole in the middle, and it had these sort of wrinkle-like things radiating out from the hole. And if you touched it and pounded it, it felt as hard as rock. And you trying to figure out how you knew it was not a fossil. There's no organism that looks anything like that. But you were trying to figure out how this became a rock. It doesn't look like a concretion. It doesn't have the texture of it or anything like that. And after he has you fooled for a while and completely guessing wrong, then he tells you the answer. And what it was is it's a leftover scraped off of a big metal wire hauser, a big hauser that goes over a cable. And as this cable kept going back and forth, it scraped epoxy off and built this epoxy ring around the cable until the cable broke and the ring was found by Morris. So that's a great example of a fake, not fake, but a pseudo. You have to sort of know that would be the way to do it. Most paleontologists could never guess that. So.
Well, there was a modern hoax with the Archaeoraptor that was very similar to some of those classic ones. That's
right. Well, what they did there, I mean, it was based on real fossils. So in that sense, it was real specimens. but it was two different real specimens that were then put together in the same block and convincingly sort of melded together. So anyone who doesn't know what these things are really supposed to look like could be convinced that they were all from the same animal. And that was what the Chinese farmer who did it eventually did. He was basically, what they do out there is they enhance the market value of their property, right? Which means they'll fake parts of it in order to make it a more valuable sale. Then once it actually reached people who are real paleontologists, there's just a couple of paleo artists who bought it first and believed it was real. Once it went to a real paleontologist like Phil Curry, who was at the Tyrrell Museum at the time, now retired, he knew right away that it wasn't real. He knew that it was the two different animals that slapped together because he knew what to look for. So it rarely actually fools real paleontologists, but it can fool people who think they're paleontologists.
Yeah, there's an interesting story with the background on the Archaeoraptor, because as Donald said, it was two real fossils, and I have just a tiny bit of involvement in this. I mean, Stephen Zirkus, the one who went and bought that fossil illegally.
Zirkus family. Yes.
Yeah, and I had spoken to the man. He was a paleo artist, and he was an extremely talented paleo artist.
He was,
and he did some really great work. And I remember calling them and speaking to him and his wife, and just praising what great artists they were, because it was inspirational. Their quality was so good. But he went out and he bought this fossil, and he put down, if I remember correctly, $80,000 on
it's
this. It's
illegal to ship them out of the country anyway, too. So
yeah, so he's doing everything wrong pretty much. And the fossil that he got, this is a really bizarre story, actually, because the fossil that he got was two different fossils. If one of them was a Cretaceous bird, not of any terrible significance, but then the other one, the tail that was put on this, was from an animal that was later recognized as Microraptor. Now, this is hugely significant. So Microraptor is the four-winged glider.
Yeah.
Now, Microraptor was misnamed because that animal was named 100 years before it was discovered. In 1915, William C. Beebe was an ornithologist who was working on Archaeopteryx, and he realized that Archaeopteryx had flight feathers on the hind legs. And that meant that Archaeopteryx must have been trying to use its legs as, a backup flight mechanism. And so he proposed that in between the prior saurian form and getting to Archaeopteryx, he wanted to put another transitional species between them. And he described this would be the four-winged glider, and he described that as Tetrapteryx. That's exactly what Microraptor is, predicted 100 years before it was discovered. So it was given a crappy name. It wasn't given the name it deserved. But then it gets even weirder, because Zirkus would have objected to that. I went to go visit his museum. I called him as we were going in. I said, I'm coming through town. I'm going to come by your museum. It'd be great to meet you, get a picture and everything. And he refused. And I was a little alarmed that he refused. And he left. So I show up. He's not there. He doesn't want to be there when I'm there. Now, how weird is that, right?
Yeah.
So I'm touring his museum, and I'm admiring his artwork, and I finally figure out what the problem is. He had a cladogram on one wall of his museum that was effectively upside down, because he was a member of BAND, BAND, meaning birds are not dinosaurs. So that in the 1980s, there was a handful of people, and I'm not going to name them here, but there was a handful of people who made a pact that they were going to deny any and all evidence that birds were descended from dinosaurs. They're it's like a religious conviction. It was like a covenant.
Yep.
Yeah. And so they're just going to reject any and all evidence. So
was Alan Fiducia part of that?
Yes, indeed.
Last surviving major
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to call him out, but he still waves
dead.
the flag proudly.
Yeah, so and Reuben, I think it was Reuben was the other guy. There's
and the late
every single article ever from like the 1990s on, every single article that ever proposed that dinosaurs did not evolve from dinosaurs would have Reuben's or Fiducia's name on it. Everyone, or both. Every one of them. They're the only ones completely on their own. And so I see this. And so Stephen Zirkus has accidentally, illegally, stupidly, $80,000 stupidly bought this fossil And he didn't realize it's not the composite that's valuable, right? He wanted the bird thing with the tail on it. He wanted it to go the other way. But no, if he had the original piece of what it actually was, but he would reject that because it was opposite of what he wanted to believe. He wanted to believe that dinosaurs evolved from birds. The fuck kind of stupidity? What kind of idiocy is that?
Yeah, that's a sad story in lots of ways. And then the sort of the twist, and to finish the story, is that, as I said, when scientists realized what it was, they clearly saw that it had been put together as a composite of two different animals. But meanwhile, because Zirkus had good connections with National Geographic jumped the gun and published this thing before it had been in a peer-reviewed scientific journal. And that's unknown.
And that's
I gotta add.
Wave up.
Yeah, sorry about that.
I got to add one more thing. Circus had spent. Let's remember this. He spent $80,000. He lives in southern Utah. Who has that kind of money, right? He paid a house value for this fossil, and he gets a scientist to look at it, and the scientist says, "I think it's a fake." We got another scientist to look at it, said, this is two different fossils glued together. And so we got another scientist to look at the same thing. It was like a half a dozen people looked at this. Every single scientist that looked at it said, this is a fraud, this is a forgery, this is a fake. But he blew 80 grand on this thing.
Yeah, so
you want to talk about the sunk cost, right?
Yeah.
So he's not going to accept that. So what do the creationists say? Again, that Archaeoraptor fooled the entire worldwide scientific. No, it fooled a paleo artist.
Who's not an anatomist. Yep.
And he actually had something cool there with Microraptor and didn't even. No, we're not going to.
But he wouldn't know it because of his. And I don't mean the guy died shortly after that. I don't mean to speak ill of the dead, but I mean, damn. He was a good paleo artist. I gave him that.
Yeah, but you don't confuse the two, right? He was never formally trained in vertebrate paleontology to the level that he could actually tell bones apart or tell difficult specimens apart. That's a very different skill than being a great artist.
Yeah.
Now, I know Sunny has a whole bunch of questions that she wanted to get through.
Yeah, we've been hogging it all here. Let Sunny take it.
No, you guys are, I am absolutely enjoying this. I'm like a total geek who's just sitting here absorbing it all. Go ahead, Bree, what were you going to say?
So I was going to say, can I get your commentary on Elasmotherium before the update with the horn? Can I get your thoughts on that before we move forward? I think Aron has some thoughts on it too.
Yeah, since I work on rhinos, I'll take the first spot here. Elasmotherium is known from a number of good skulls, and all the good skulls have this enormous raised boss. It looks like a big cylindrical knob on their foreheads. And so it's always presumed that this thing had a big horn on there, because rhino horns, of course, are not made of bone. They're made out of hairs that are glued together. And so we never see rhino horns fossilized, except for rare instances of woolly rhino mummies. So we have to sort of infer the size of the horn from that boss. And so it was probably pretty big because the body of the Elasmotherium was elephant-sized. But how long it is so far we have no direct evidence, that's as far as I know, unless they've actually found one preserved. But it would have been huge. And then they had no horn in their nose, right? But rhinos have very different combinations. Most rhinos have no horns at all. That's something that came really late in rhino evolution. Some have paired horns in the nose. Some have, like the black rhino, white rhino, have a tandem horn, one behind the other. Most of the other three living rhinos have just a tiny little horn on their nose. But every you can imagine combination, they've tried it out one time or another.
It doesn't matter the size of the horn; it's how you use it.
Yeah, well, the males and females both have them, so it's not a sexual dimorphic feature.
Well, that goes really nicely into the next question, which is, could you tell us about the evolutionary history of rhinos and camels?
Well, thank you. That's actually what I work on. I'm happy to talk about that. So, as I said, I've worked on rhinos since about 1978 when I first started working on them in New York. And I published a big book on American rhinos in 2005. I'll start with that. And both rhinos and camels, as well as horses, as well as several other groups, are largely North American groups, even though we don't have them alive in North America anymore and haven't mostly since the late Ice Age. They have a long history in North America. We have thousands and thousands of fossils of all these groups. As I said, a whole floor of rhinos in New York, a whole floor of camels in New York. So I'm just now making a dent on the camel floor. I'm the last person on the planet who knows what's in that collection, basically. But anyway, so rhinos start out with small animals the size of a dachshund, and then they get to animals the size of maybe a Great Dane. None of these early rhinos had horns. That was a very late invention. You wouldn't know them as a rhino until you look close at their anatomy, and especially their teeth. They have the upper molars have a crest pattern on the upper molars, looks like the Greek letter pi, which is a giveaway for a rhino tooth. Anytime you see one rhino tooth, you know that's what it is. And then they evolved various combinations of different things. So the main lineage of rhinos did a whole bunch of things in North America, including paired horns 2 different ways and horns on the tip of their nose and so on. They all vanished from North America about 4 million years ago for reasons we don't completely understand, but it's probably to the climate change that happened at the end of the Miocene. There's also a side branch of rhinos called heracodonts, which are been extinct for a much longer time, that reached gigantic sizes in Asia. The big animal that is often called Baluchitherium or Drickotherium is now Paraceratherium is the correct senior name. That animal was 20 feet high at the shoulder and weighed more than 5 elephants. So it was really, really huge. And that was a hornless rhino that tried to be a giraffe, basically, living up treetops in Mongolia about 40 million years ago. And then other rhinos tried it several times to look like hippos. In fact, North America, since hippos aren't native here, except for in drug dealers' properties, hippos don't come here naturally. And so we had several instances of rhinos trying to be like hippos, very short-legged, barrel-chested, eating grasses, that kind of thing. And so we have examples of that. Then they vanished here in North America, but of course they were still in the old world, and they have a long history in Eurasia and then also in Africa, where of course they still have 5 species alive today, although they're all on the endangered list. And some, like the Sumatran rhino, maybe only have 70 individuals entirely live population in the entire world. Then camels, even more interesting story. Camels have always been an American group. They evolved here first about 45 million years ago, a little animal that looks like a small deer, except their teeth are very distinctive. You can tell it's camel right away. And then they get to be really common in the Badlands, South Dakota, where I did my doctoral dissertation. They have a camel that's sort of a gazelle-sized and gazelle-shaped. And then, because camels had North America themselves for all this time, they often perform the role of other animals. And I should mention, by the way, none of these camels have humps. Humps only occur in 2 of the 6 species of camels alive today. The Bactrian and the dromedary in Asia and Africa. The other 4 species, which are in South America, have no humps. And as far as we know, none of the fossil camels have humps. It's hard to know because it doesn't fossilize very well. But anyway, the camel history in North America got very diverse. And there are some camels that did giraffe-like jobs. There's one that's built like a giraffe, which I'm currently working on. My next trip to New York at the end of next month, I'm going to be working on them again. There are others which are gigantic. They're 10 feet tall at the shoulder and weighed bigger than a rhino, and a lot of other things in between. Some are really small and gazelle-like. They have a huge range of shapes and sizes because they were doing the roles that not just antelopes and other things from African savanna did, but even giraffe jobs, because none of those groups had true antelopes or giraffes ever lived in North America naturally.
What group is closest related to the giraffes? Which other artiodactyls are the closest?
There's a lot of argument about that, but it's pretty well conceded now that pronghorns and giraffes are closest relatives, and then deer and the others are close, but camels are not close related to any of them.
I want to jump in for
camels are very distant from the rest of the ruminating artiodactyls.
I want to jump in for a moment. I was at a dig in Wyoming in the Badlands. My wife and I spent our 13th wedding anniversary on a paleo expedition in the Badlands of Wyoming, and every morning we had pronghorns coming through the plate. And the tradition was to call them antelope, but they're not antelope.
No, they're not.
It's amusing to me to think that the fact that the pronghorn antelope is actually more closely related to a giraffe than anything else. Right. And one of the things that we found, my wife found fossils in this expedition for a horse-like rhino, and she found fossils for a rhino-like horse.
Yeah, you can call it that.
Because horses and rhinos are actually very closely related. So you go back far enough, they look a lot just
in the early easing. Yeah, when I give a talk about this, it's in the last time I did a big evolutionary talk for Seth Andrews at 2015 there. The thing I remember that sort of illustrates this is when I was an undergraduate at UC Riverside, Mike Woodburn, our professor, gave us these unsorted trays of early Eocene, so 55 million years old, teeth and jaws of different mammals that were found in the Big Horn Basin of Wyoming, which had come up through the ALF collection, the Webb School. It's a long story. But anyway, we were given this as a class project, the final class project. And our job was to dig through all the literature and figure out how to identify everything in our tray, and gave us no other clues. And I ended up with a tray that had a bunch of jaws of the earliest horse, which used to be called the Eohippus or Heractherium, but it's now mostly Proto-Eohippus. It's got several names, actually. And also the earliest relative of rhinos and tapirs, which is a thing called Homogalax. And I first couldn't tell them apart. And then I gradually looked at the literature and looked at them closer, and I realized I could finally distinguish the subtle differences. That's how similar rhinos, horses, and tapirs were at the beginning. They were so similar, both skulls and teeth, that nobody but an expert can tell them apart. But any kid can tell you a rhino is not a horse. Okay, that's how much they've changed, but how similar they were when they started.
So persiodactyls, which are rhinos, horses, and
Persiodactyls, yes.
It sounds like you're saying they're basically a chrono species at their root. Is that right? That there's
no, they're different clades. They branch fairly early, and they probably branched from a group that was already in Asia before they arrived in North America at the beginning of the Eocene. But their earliest relatives in North America are not that yet far down the branch. So visually, when you look at their teeth, you look at their skulls, everything we have about them says, they're really similar, and it takes a really trained eye to tell them apart. Usually the teeth is the best place to tell that. And then, as I said, certainly by the end of the Middle Eocene, they're very different. Okay, rhinos have really started to take off. Tapirs are the dominant group at the time, and horses just have a major lineage going into that time. So,
This kind of brings up our next question, which I know, Aron, you're going to want to also kind of get into this, because we're talking about creationism versus evolution. And so what I hear this question a lot: how does biodiversity disprove creationism? And I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Do you want to go first, Aron, or you want to go first?
Either one of us could take an hour, right?
Yeah, I'll make a real short answer and then let Aron take off. The basic thing is that one of the strongest lines of evidence for evolution was something Darwin himself knew. In fact, Linnaeus knew this in 1758, is that life shows a branching, bushy history, a true tree of life. And this was apparent in Linnaeus's classification in 1758. And Darwin, of course, recognized in the 1830s that was only explicable if life had a common ancestor. So that's the basic idea. Biodiversity is this gigantic tree of life that we have very good evidence now how it's all constructed and who's related to whom. Most of that's now been figured out. And it's really, there's no other explanation for it, right? There are no created kinds. There's no simple way to separate a lot of groups. As I said, if you go back far enough, rhinos and horses and tapirs look identical. You would never make them into separate kinds if you were in the early Eocene, but now, of course, creationists will play and pretend they can be distinguished that way. All this is just, the more you know about this history, and especially the fossil history of this family tree of life, the more obvious it is there's no other explanation. Go ahead,
The
Aron.
series that I'm working on right now with Bree for Arachnomorph, we're talking about the evolution of spiders, and in a previous playlist we did the evolution of snakes. And in both cases, one of the things that I look at is the type of varieties that show up in different continents in different ways. So and then the subgroups in their different regions, whatever. When you try to look at how these organisms manage to disperse across the world and then only appear in these certain areas, whereas the Noah's Ark story, of course, would imply an entirely different scenario where this is impossible. When you look at the type of biodiversity in either group or in any group, try to look at how these have dispersed to produce these genera or these families, which only occur here, and the way that they do. There's amount of time involved that's necessary for this kind of progression, and you can't get there from a Noah's Ark perspective, from coming off of Noah's Ark, and then you get all of these different species of spiders that only occur in South America. Weren't they on the Ark? What the hell happened, right?
Yeah, that was another Darwin's lines of evidence, is biogeography. It started, of course, with his recognition of the finches and other animals of the Galapagos that he didn't think about at the time he was in the Galapagos, but recognized later how important that was. And that is really, again, a second line of biodiversity, if you will, namely that there is no way a Noah's Ark story explains what we now see. Why do kangaroos and other marsupials go to Australia and nowhere else? It's completely absurd, and it only makes sense if you're a Middle Easterner from 4000 BC and the only animals live in the Middle East, and there's not that many different kinds of them. That perspective is the only way in which you can imagine they all walked off Mount Ararat.
I really liked your example when you were talking about the camels a few minutes ago. That really drives home this ecology aspect of it, because what you were talking about is what they call niche partitioning, right? That's where that there's roles in an environment that have to be filled in order for the environment to function. And if there's nobody to fill that role, a species will come from a different role and step into there. Like he was talking about the camel, that's more like an antelope or more like a giraffe, because there's a high browser or a small herd animal in the group. So the fact that we have that and it's so diverse, like what Aron was saying, this group over here did fill the niche and this group over there filled that niche, that no matter what the environment is, the niches are there and the groups will just be subtly different or incredibly different, but they'll fill the same roles. It's fantastic.
Right. That's something that's well demonstrated many times in the fossil record. Lots and lots of ecological convergence, which tells us that there's a debate among ecologists whether the concept of niche is a real thing. Does a niche exist without its occupant? They say it's like a Zen koan. Does someone hear if a tree in a forest falls and no one hears it? Did it happen? That kind of thing. No, it actually does seem to suggest that niches are real, at least to some level. And we have many examples of that. The most dramatic one I can think of off the top of my head is saber-toothed animals have evolved a minimum of 5 times. And they've evolved not just in cats, the saber-toothed cat that most people know, but also there's been a saber-toothed marsupial lived in South America when there were no true cats there yet, a thing called the Lacosmilus, which if you know how to tell it apart, it looks very different on the skull level. But if you saw a picture of it, you may not recognize it. It's not a cat. There is a group of things called nimravids or false cats that are not related to cats at all that have saber-tooth involved. There's a thing called Barburophilis that did it over and over and over again. And then a group of extinct predators called creodonts, which have a saber-tooth animal. So the job of being saber-tooth apparently exists out there, or has existed in the past, possibly no longer exists because we've wiped out most of the big animals they used to eat. But back in the end of the last ice age, there were plenty of big animals that saber-tooth probably preyed upon. Their niche existed, and when it's not filled, sooner or later somebody fills it, and it probably wouldn't happen. You could probably argue that niche disappeared when we wiped out most of the large mammals on the planet at the end of the last ice age. But before that niche existed many times when humans messed things up.
But
just within cats.
Just
within cats, you've had the saber-tooth kind of thing.
Multiple genera of saber-tooth cats.
Yeah. So there's Homotherium.
So there's Thylacos, there's Thycleo.
Lacosmilus is one that's a marsupial,
and that's from South America. And then there's one from, and then there's one that filled the niche in Australia too. And I'm trying to remember the name of it.
No true saber-tooth in Australia. There's some weird-looking predators like the Thylacoleo, which is a lion equivalent, but it's got very weird teeth. Look like the skull looks like a turtle.
Saber-tooth incisors is what it has.
Yeah.
It's really weird. Saber-like teeth though.
But I have my doubts about
mouth, which look like no predator you'll see anywhere else in the world. So
yeah, I agree with Donald on that. I got a question, Don, on the nimravids. I'm a little confused because in things like Barburophilis, you can tell that obviously the way that the fangs are sheathed, for example, entirely different than Smilodon and others. But as my understanding was that the difference, or the only difference between the nimravids and true cats, was in the shape of the inner ear. That, in other words, they were virtually indistinguishable. When you say they're not related at all, I mean, they're so very close.
Well, there's a lot of debate about that. That isn't resolved yet. What people used to do, of course, was classify carnivorous mammals based on teeth, which is what everyone's used to using. But carnivorous mammals have very strict dietary restrictions, and that often causes a lot of convergence, as we just talked about, saber-toothing appearing multiple times. And so when they started looking at nimravids closer, they recognized that they got to get away from the teeth because there's a good chance that's due to convergence. And that's where they focused on the bony parts of the middle ear. And if you look at the back of the skull of a bear, of a dog, of a cat, the details of the ear region are very different. We're not talking about the pinna, the outer ear. We're talking about the bony parts that support your hamel, anvil, and stirrup, and all that other part, the base of your skull. That's your bony part of your ear, and that is very, very full of anatomical characters. Cats have very distinctive features in their middle and inner ear that are never mistaken for any other group of animal, and these rabbits don't have cat-like ears. Then the question is, what are they related to? And there's been debate whether they're on the cat branch of the carnivora, or there's some who argued they're on the dog branch of carnivora. It's really not very clear because their ears are fairly primitive in a lot of ways. But either way, they're not cats, and that's the key thing we learned once we got away from the teeth in this group. The teeth fooled us for a long time.
It surprises me too.
They may not be filiforms. They may be caniforms.
That's right. Some arguments have been made they're caniforms. So
that would be a fascinating.
The problem is they're mostly their ear region is fairly primitive, so they don't have a lot of specialized features that put them on either branch of the carnivora.
One of the things I'd like to bring up about when we're doing paleontology and how you classify life forms, that way you get a hold of the genome and you might get a different story. Because while there can be debate over the lineage of pterosaurs, for example, for which we have no genetics to talk about, we don't even have any like closely related animals that we can use to get any kind of it. We don't have any intelligence on the actual formation. Morphology is all we've got to go on for things like pterosaurs. But other animals, for example, there was a handful of mammals that it was understood if these things eat ants and they have no teeth, they must have evolved from a common ancestor that had no teeth and ate ants, right? So we have aardvarks, and we have, of course, the anteater, and then we have the pangolin, right? And so these all must be common. But then when you get the genome back, the genome says, "Oh hell no!" The only one that is actually the anteater. I think is the anteater.
Anteater is the only one. This is Xenarthran, right? None of the others.
Xenarthran. That's the word I was looking for. Xenarthran. And then the aardvark turns out to be more closely related to elephants. And then the real surprise was pangolins, more closely related.
Yep.
Right. How the fuck is that carnivorous?
Because anteating is basically a very specialized role that shows up over and over and over again. Not just these groups, but a lot of extinct groups do this as well. And one of the things it really does, of course, is that they end up either with no teeth or very primitive teeth, because teeth aren't necessary when you lick ants, and you don't have to grind them, right? They just go right up your tongue and you swallow them. And the consequence is there's a lot of convergence there, because that's a very popular niche. Ants and termites are a huge food resource. Every continent sooner or later gets something that eats them, specializes in them. And it really did. Most paleontologists were baffled. I mean, they recognized that these things probably weren't related because they were, all eating something similar diet, and there's not a lot of similarities besides that. But it really did surprise when the molecular stuff started coming out in the 90s and the 2000s that put them that far apart on the mammal family tree.
You know what I like about this niche we're talking about is we have carnivore, two lineages of carnivores that are both moving towards that niche. You have your aardwolves, right? That are moving towards that anteater. Then you have your sloth bears, which also live that similar kind of lifestyle.
The aardwolf is trying to be an anteater, but it isn't very good at it. It still has teeth too. So
they have reduced teeth though. They both do, which
is
funny because an aardwolf is as a hyena, which when you think of teeth, when you think of hyena,
very weird hyena. That's right.
But it's actually from a group of hyenas that was. Oh, sorry. I'll stop.
I didn't mean to cut off. I'm sorry.
I was going to mention the running hyenas, which were more like dogs than the modern hyenas. But
and North America had a hyena called Chasmoporthetes. It was like a cheetah, very long limb, very fast running.
Okay, so we have just over 10 minutes, and so I'm going to do a couple things from the live chat, and then I have some just silly questions to ask you guys really quickly. Mm-hmm. So the first one, I want to thank the Sinister Porpoise for his $2 or her $2 or their $2 super chat. DNA, greatest thing that isn't Python or C. Thank you so much. Next, we have from Susan Turpin. I want to know what everyone on the panel's favorite dinosaur is.
Well, I grew up with Iguanodon as my first favorite dinosaur, because I was one of those kids who got started early on dinosaurs. And Iguanodon was very famous. It was only the second dinosaur to be named, and the first one whose actual locality we know. I've been there where they found the first Iguanodon. So that's my favorite.
Tetrapteryx.
Okay.
which is to say Microraptor under its
which would
junior
called
synonym.
Microraptor, that's right.
Sonny, what's yours?
I'm trying to remember the name of it. It was when I was listening to Aron Ra's the foundational the my mind just can't
Systematic
even.
classification of life.
Yeah, it was one of those that you were talking about that just drove you nuts with the young Earth creationist with a specific dinosaur. I will
Creationists
get
love
to it and
T-Rex,
I
of
will.
course, but that's everybody's favorite.
Yeah. No, I'll think of it and I'll come back to it. What about you? What about you, Bree?
Well, probably corvids, just because they're like super smart. I don't know whether a crow or a magpie, but
Well, that's right. Birds and dinosaurs. We can add
definitely
birds to the list here.
yeah. So I don't
Unless
know
you
that
talk
any of the
to Larry
dinosaurs.
Martin or Alan Paduccia or a few others. Yeah.
Next, we have from Skeptic Haven. What the heck is a hyena? Is it dog kind, cat kind, or
Well,
what?
it's not a kind of anything. Kind isn't a scientific term. But what it is, it's a feliform, which means it's in the branch with the cats, the felids, and also with the mongoose and the civet and the meerkat. Those are also feliformia. But the hyena is actually a member of a whole family, Hyenidae. There's two major species in Africa, of course, the spotted hyena and the brown hyena, plus the aardwolf we talked about earlier. And then, as I said, they have an extensive fossil record all across Eurasia. They were often the biggest predator in the Miocene and Pliocene Eurasia. There were some of these giant cave hyenas that were bigger than a lion, and of course had much more terrible bite because they could crush bones. And they were specialized in crushing mammoth bones. That's how big and how ferocious they were. And as I said, we always think of hyenas as never living outside the old world, but as I said, there was one North American migrant that got out of Eurasia called Chasmoprothetes, which is a cheetah-like hyena. So yes, they have a lot of other roles besides what we're familiar with in Africa today, and they lived everywhere except South America.
And the genome came back with a surprise on that one as well, that hyenas are basically glorified civets.
Yeah, they're closer to civets than they are to cats. You're right.
Yeah. Crocutus, spotted hyenas actually were in Beringia, so like barely that genus barely edged into North America, but apparently they kept getting across there.
And the I think is it the spotted hyena or the striped hyena? I can't remember. What one of those is proof that they cannot have been created by an intelligent designer, because what they have to go through for their sex is just horrific.
The females have a pseudopenis made out of their vaginal lips and all the rest, and when they finally have to give birth, they have tremendous damage to their genital organs because the birth canal is so small.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and females are dominant among hyenas. So they have a hierarchy where the dominant female runs the pack and the males are outsiders.
To clarify, the way that I read it, I read something that said that they have to chew off the clitoris in order to give birth.
That's possibly we don't know if that happens all the time, but it's been seen. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just that.
So yeah, if you want some kinky stuff,
we are not here to kink shame the hyenas, though. They do their hyena stuff.
No, everyone has different strokes, right? Hyenas are.
Oh my gosh! So. Yeah, that's wow. Okay, so now we're going to go through
just to reinforce the earlier point. The job of hyena has been performed by other animals. North America had a group of dogs called the Borophagenes, which are the bone-crushing dogs that have these enormous crushing teeth that resemble the hyena's teeth, except they're dogs. So they did that job when hyenas had not yet reached North America.
And I want to think about that too. Imagine what Epicyon would have been like if you were to encounter it. When we're talking about something that is like the size of an English Mastiff, and it's clearly dog-like, though it wouldn't look like any dog you've ever seen. But the more important thing to think about is here's a dog that has not had 20,000 years worth of human companionship. Here's a dog that has never seen a human, never been descended from a dog. You are food. That's it.
You're easy pickings for Epicyon Haydeni. Yep. It's almost
just think about encountering.
The big ones are almost bear-sized. So
just think about encountering Cujo, and it's just all about killing you.
Yeah, and breaking your bones too. It does that as well. So.
All right, here's
what was the other question you had?
Some quick little ones that you guys will appreciate. Is evolution a proven theory, and isn't it just a theory?
Okay, this is the classic one we always have to deal with. People
Mhm.
misunderstand the meaning of the word theory. In the popular lingo, theory is a wild speculation idea, like theories of why JFK was assassinated. In science, theory is a very well substantiated idea that has a huge amount of evidence supporting it and takes a huge amount of evidence to overthrow it. So gravity is just a theory, but none of us are floating out of our chairs right now. Okay. The germ theory of disease was vividly demonstrated when COVID hit the world, and yet there are people who don't believe in germs and bacteria or anything else. Those are theories, but we all accept gravity. We all mostly accept the germ theory of disease. Evolution is just as supported as that. Okay. So that is something, it's an old creationist saw that only is basically using the ignorance that science most Americans have as a way to mislead them.
Yeah, and if I could tap onto that, I'm not worried about nuclear war because I don't believe in atomic theory.
Yep. There's
There
lots
you
of
go.
examples of that. So,
So what is your biggest pet peeve about creationism?
for me, as a scientist, I mean, other than the fact they annoy the hell out of me, that's a peeve in a general sense. The way in which they operate, of course, is very dishonest and under the table and slimy. But the biggest part is that science operates by moving forward, by falsifying ideas that don't hold up, by dumping ideas that don't been supported, by not repeating ideas that have been discredited, because no one will take you seriously if you don't learn from your mistakes. Creationists have never learned a new thing in their lives, okay? They're still repeating the garbage arguments like just a theory or second law of thermodynamics, or all these things have been debunked 50, 70 years ago. And they just keep on saying them because they're not scientists, right? They're just trying to argue a point and win audiences. They're doing propaganda, not science. And that's how you do propaganda, by repeating the same lies over and over again and not listening to the fact your lies have been debunked. And so that's why I finally learned, when I finally got tired of dealing with the fact you can never get them to stop saying the same things, because they don't learn new stuff. They aren't scientists, right? Scientists learn new stuff and we modify our ideas when we find they're wrong. They don't.
And for
Mark,
me,
what
it's
about
just the
you?
fact that that creationism is lying. That's it. That's all.
Yeah.
I mean, it's possible to be a sincere believer in creationism. It's possible to grow up with everybody around you being creationists. Everybody believes that. And then you get into an argument with somebody like me, and then you're going to very quickly have to make a choice. I'm going to present information to you, and you can either accept and explore that information and change your position accordingly, or you can reject that information and start lying to yourself and others.
Right.
So you come to a crossroads where you have to make a decision. Do you want to remain honest, or do you want to remain creationist, because it is no longer possible to be both?
Right. And of course, the reality is we're talking about very deeply held beliefs, and especially in the context of evolution, these people who have been raised creationists believe they're going to hell if they accept evidence that goes against the Bible. So you're not going to win that by logic. You're not going to win that by evidence. I mean, if you're talking about damnation to hell, that's a lot more powerful motivation than seeking the truth.
Yeah. Bree, do you have a pet peeve that you want to share?
With about young Earth creationists.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Or yeah, any type of creationism instead of
yeah, just
evolution.
the so there's this we find a bone in the ground and all you prove something died there, but we don't just examine a bone, we examine an entire ecosystem.
Yeah.
The fossil record is not in classified into kinds, it's classified into formations, which are the remains of ecosystems.
Yeah.
Don, yeah, go lay it out, what you were about to say, because I imagine it's going to sound more elegant than me.
When you find a bone in the dirt, and let's say it's fossilized bone, it doesn't just tell you that something died. It also tells you that it lived long
Right.
enough to get to that level of maturity before it died. It also tells you what kind of, what kind of lifestyle it had, what derivative of animal it was. I mean, like somebody
What
with
type of
Kent
food
Hovind
was
was showing.
around?
Kent Hovind was showing what I suspect is a deer's jaw, and I'm like, okay, well, that's from an artiodactyl, right? And even if you can't identify what kind of deer it is, or if in fact it is a deer, you can tell that it is an artiodactyl. So we have
It's a
these
giveaway right
generalities.
away.
Yep.
Yeah, once you learn how to identify them, that's one of the easiest things to do. So
So we just have about a half a minute left. So I'd like to kind of go around and see what your final thoughts are, and also what do you have coming up? What would you like our viewers to know is coming up for you? So we'll start with you, Don.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm just constantly running a battle here between teaching giant teaching loads and trying to keep up with my publication schedule and my research load. But I just had a new book come out called "The Evolution of Story of Evolution: 25 Discoveries." Came out last year, so that's my latest book that's related to this topic. And there's, of course, my more recent edition of my original evolution book that's still out. And currently, I'm finishing my semester. I got 3 weeks to go, and I'm going to do a lot of research in New York at the end of this month. And then I got to write another book. Actually, I have one more book that's already in production, and a new book that's on the way from there. So the next book is called "The Story of Climate: 25 Discoveries." So that's where I'm headed next.
Awesome, awesome. Aaron, you?
I'm supposed to complete another book by January, and we're talking about answering Genesis.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about basically it's kind of the evolution of Genesis, where we get these tropes, these story elements, and that sort of thing. That's what I'm working on now. And then once I get, and I'll be able to dive into that once I get out of this schedule. This Friday, or excuse me, this Saturday, I'm going to be in Fort Worth for DebateCon. Next Saturday, I'm in Boston for SatanCon, and the next Saturday after that, I'm in Calgary for ReasonCon, and then I've got.
I hope they're paying you for all this travel.
Yeah, travel's expensive. That's
I
keeping me
know,
wiped
very
out.
much so now.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm hoping to recover from that and then get back into serious work.
Travel is tiring too. I know that for experience.
Yes. Bree, you want to say anything that you're doing, that you're coming up with?
Yeah, just I have my show on Saturdays, live from the Hive, 9:30 a.m. Central Standard Time. Do some science, look at some cryptozoology, debunk some crazy claims. So if you like that sort of stuff, certainly feel free to stop by. Again, like Aaron said, we've also been working on this spider thing, so that's right around the corner. And when Aaron gets the time in his busy schedule to squeeze it in, I'm excited to be plugging that too.
Fantastic. Well, for us here at Skeptic Haven, don't forget that we have other shows on. So just about every night, not quite every, but almost every night, you can find something. You can spend your Wednesday nights at the Secular Soapbox with Apostasy and Baphometal. Thursday nights, of course, are here with me, Sunny Shell, and Bree. We have Saturdays with the Global Atheist and Women Atheist Unload. We have lots of great hosts for that. And Sundays, we now have Let's Talk, our new call-in show. So think about that. And we also would like, if you guys like our content, like, subscribe, hit the bell, all that good stuff. That's free and doesn't cost you a thing. We want you to share this and let others know about us. And Bree, what about our patrons? Do you want to talk about our patrons?
Oh goodness, well, if I could see the spanner, I would. But there we go. So to thank the patrons, we got Eric Ozols, Tara S, Ryan, Deneen Murphy, Dan D, Michael Wiseman, Kathy Cotton, Cindy Plaza, our very own Sunny Shell, Aaron Coalson, and Phil Calderone. Thank you, everybody, for your contribution to help make Skeptic Haven the place it is today, so we can have great guests on like this and continue to bring you some entertainment.
Absolutely. This was so much fun. I just sat back and listened. That was really cool. I'm like, wow, this is awesome. I would love to have, of course, we have Arn on, whenever we can. And Don, we'd love to have you back. I'd like to
Happy to
hear.
do it. It's fun.
Awesome. I'd like, next time you're on, I want to hear about what's his name? The Gish Gallop. You had a
I
debate
debated
with
Wayne
him.
Gish.
Yes. And
98.3. Yep.
I would love to hear about that next time you're on.
It's a
For the
wild
rest
story.
of you,
Yep.
yes. For the rest of you, remember to always think critically. Have a great night, everyone.